Adele, I wanted to take you back to earlier in the 20th century. Near Christmas, as I understand, of 1943, you met and subsequently lived with Elizabeth Patterson, Nadine Tolstoy, Narina Machabelli, and Mildred Kyle. You also took care of Narina and Nadine as their health got bad. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Well, I'd say they took care of me more than I took care of them. There's a prelude to that, of course. And it is true that it's actually the histories of this, to some extent, are in Bow's Lord Maher, 1952. He records some of that, and also in glimpses, Bow speaks about our meeting with Baba, Phyllis, and myself. And Phyllis kept she's a very good journalist, as you know, in The Awakener, and she wrote the history very nicely. And the different interviews, well, one was in Nashwan Glow magazine. Yeah, we were, Phyllis was a friend several years before we both came to Meher Baba. We had relationship through mutual friends at the university where I attended. I was a matriculated student at that place, studying comparative philosophy and religion. My brothers were in the Second World War. My brothers were medical doctors, and it was very interesting, the connections. I always have, I should say, the nicest thing about my natural qualities is I've always appreciated the connections that one could make for Baba, in Baba, through Baba. And of course, that is also Baba's theme in this last message that has been the subject of study. If you took that seminar with Don Stevens about our chain of internal connections. Well, my internal connections were very strong with my brothers, and it was a very big need I had to resolve this contradiction between the God that I loved and worshipped so as the all-merciful Father, which of course he is, and then the materialistic gross world with the wars, the Second World War, and all. I was a member of I became a member of all the organizations that fought for peace, Fellowship of Reconciliation, etc., etc.
And how did you meet Phyllis?
And the way I met Phyllis was that I had been working toward a higher degree in comparative religion and philosophy, and I was also working part-time at the Hayden Planetarium. So in the times when I was working for my degree, I had a good friend, Victor, who told me, "You really ought to meet my good friend Phyllis." And he said her major is aesthetics. Mine was ethics. I thought, how in this tumultuous time could anyone have time with aesthetics? So I thought to myself, I bet she's a snobbish sort of person. And I went to one of these classes where Victor was going to introduce me. She was going to visit that. She came as an auditor, and it was a class in something that was very abstruse. It was a required class, Alfred North Whitehead. Did any of you ever study Alfred North Whitehead? But it was beyond me, and at least the way it was being presented. And so I met downstairs of the Philosophy Hall at Columbia, where incidentally I met Jeff Wolverton. Is he here?
Yeah, you remember that 1940?
Yeah.
What was it,
No,
Jeff?
I didn't. Sit back. No, I only met him at another period. And at that time, it was they had St. Paul Chapel where you could, rest yourself before you go to the class. And was parading around with a petition for peace. I was sponsored by the American Friends Service Committee on a peace conference, and I did approach Phyllis, who was waiting and who I had not been introduced to, and I said, "Would you like to sign this?" And sure enough, she would not. So that confirmed me that she was a little aloof. And upstairs I went, and Victor introduced me to her, and that was that until the talk began, and she spoke right to the point in a language that I could comprehend, and she was on my wavelength, so to speak, and I immediately liked her very much, and we became friends.
And then,
So it was Phyllis who told me about Eastern thought. All my subjects were on Western, and across the street at Union Theological, of course, I had some very good instructions, but in Christianity, not in Eastern philosophy.
well, you became friends, and then you met Norina, and
Yes, we became friends before we ever heard of MeherBaba for about 3 years. And what she did for me was she gave me the interest in Eastern thought to the extent where we visited Ramakrishna and Vivekananda Center in New York. Some of you may know that. I know some of you from New York. And it was a very good introduction to Eastern thought, and it was certainly stimulated by Phyllis. And one day she called and she said, "I just heard a lady who is a disciple of a Sadhguru." In those days, it was Sadhguru Sri MeherBaba. And she said, "It's really interesting. I don't know what you think of it." She said, "The talk that I heard was public, but it is in the home of these women on, I believe it was 67th Street in Manhattan, which wasn't very far from where I lived. And of course, it was easily accessible with the subway system. And I did not drive at that time. So I went there on invitation. One could only go to Elizabeth's home on invitation. And when I was greeted by, I don't remember whether it was Nadine Tolstoy or Elizabeth, but it was a talk by Norina Machabeli. And it was a talk that she gave after having had much preparation in India through Baba in spiritual thought transmission. It was very, very beautiful. And I thought, what a contrast this is to the academic atmosphere. I immediately began breathing more freely. And I took that to heart because, of course, you come back again, you do have to wait and see what part of it is maybe just the fact that it's not as difficult to take in through the heart. And that I feel is really characteristic of the generation many of you belong to. That it is really received, Baba is received more immediately through the heart. You don't need this approach where you just develop a kind of, very scrutinizing judgment among philosophies and go that game. That is just a game. Baba has come in order to just the uniqueness of the advent of the avatar. I don't have to tell you. that it's just, it is, the compassionate one just is too compassionate. Too compassionate. I was thinking the other day, they say that Job in the Bible, he was tried such travail, and then he is so victorious because he said, though he slay me, still will I love him. I feel that about Baba. Though we slay him, still he loves us. Though we slay Baba, he still loves us.
Adele, you were talking about observing Baba and so on. You first saw Baba April 21st, 1952. While you were...
Where'd you get that? April.
I got it out of one of the books.
April 21st, that's the way it stayed. Yeah, I guess it was.
Okay. Well, that's when...
I actually met him May the 10th. That's right. My true birthday.
But do you want to tell us about when you first saw him and you were hiding you were observing him?
That's a secret.
Oh, I let the secret out of the bag.
They have that down. Oh. Yeah, well, Phyllis and I were real buddies. We'd been living together, too, before Baba for a period. And we knew... Now, let's see,
1952.
Yeah.
Baba had just come into the States.
He just came in, and he was not to have any publicity at that time. No publicity. He came with 6 men and 6 women. And the women, of course, for the first time, were Mera, Mani, Goer, Meru, Rano, and Kitty. And the men were there, too. And then, of course, there were people who came from Europe, like Delia and Anita, Carol. Well, we were aware that Baba would arrive and be there at the Pennsylvania station, the old Pennsylvania station. And that had balconies, but we really abided by, literally, I was convinced we were abiding by the directive that Baba was not to be contacted physically, and no reporters, nothing. It was, what time in the morning? I don't remember.
4:45 or something like that.
Very early. And, of course, I just get to the point of this walking frieze, the magnificence of that. Well, we hid behind the pillars, and then at one point, it was on maybe the 3rd balcony, I think, 2nd, 3rd balcony, and looking down, and of course, and then Baba appeared, sort of like a vision. Baba appeared, and I said, "There's Baba," and Phyllis, suddenly she had a panic, apparently, because she said, "Oh, I don't think I should look, but you tell me." That's really what happened. He said, "I don't think I should, but you tell me what's happening." And of course, I didn't have any panic attack about it, because I thought, well, I don't want to get Baba's attention. I stayed at one with the pillar.
Great name for a book.
And I just looked out, and there was this moving frieze. I mean, it was so mad. I've had a vision or two of a very minor sort, but there was Baba walking with these extraordinary women, Mera, Mani, and all of them, and they just were gliding along, just so beautiful. I think of course, Mera always had to be protected. We took her eventually to Bronx Zoo, and we had to surround her and protect her. And then Baba had a drizzle that day. Very few people came. so that we did surround her. But I just was trying to really recall how she was surrounded so that the order still remained, that no men were to see her. And so, of course, that's what occurred. Apparently, the way Phyllis recalled, Margaret Krask had to go to the restroom, and she came up. She never saw us, though. We were behind the pillar. But we got a report later, Baba Point said, Philadelphia.
Right.
He pointed. But when we met him, he never mentioned it.
That was in May 10th of 52, Adele. Can you tell us, imagine that we're walking with you when you first meet Baba.
What about?
Can you tell us how you felt, what you experienced, what you saw?
When I first met Baba?
When you first met him, not when you first saw him in April, but when you first met him at the center.
Yes, well, the history of that is that we had been visiting the talks of Norina Machiavelli, and I had, after testing it, found, well, everyone does. I mean, I was not infatuated with the glamour of it. I knew Norina only kept the name of princess because Baba wanted her to. She was 1,000% Baba's in every way, and she was doing his work that way. But she was very beautiful. She was one of the world's 5 great beauties, actually. And even in the 60s, when I met her, I mean, she was in her 60s, she still was a very elegant and beautiful, a person that radiated everything that I considered pure and very, very elegant. Without pretentiousness, she just was an elegant person from day one, and of course Elizabeth, our blessed Elizabeth, who was absolutely an angel. She was there doing all the work behind the scenes because she did her business, which was insurance, and her husband was a stockbroker. She did it in this home where we were invited to live. And then there was Nadine Tolstoy. So during that time, I waited, and we were invited to stay with them because just about the time that we came as just visitors, just at that time, it was where Elizabeth's father, Simeon Chapin, had given the final condition. Yes, it's with my heart, Elizabeth, I give you this center. All these other conditions, we won't go into that. Most of you know Myrtle Beach, and you should have read the history if you haven't. And you know the 5 conditions. Well, it was God's wish that at that time that we enter the scene. In fact, Phyllis and I were invited to sign for Baba's coming to this country by the Spiritual League, whatever Elizabeth named it. But it was Baba's wish that these two little ones, whoever we were, I don't know how to describe this, but we were part, I should say, of what was the beginning of the new humanity. We were the youngest ones in that group. Norina reached a lot of the white Russians and a lot of the emigre aristocracy. I used to visit a princess, a countess, several people that needed communication from Norina. Well, you know, Norina gave the clarion call in America to that there was an avatar here. I think Norina did the most work. Jean Adriel and Malcolm Schloss Of course, they arranged for Baba to come with Meredith Starr, but it was Norina and her work that reached most people. That is definitely my perception. I think Elizabeth would agree on that.
I wanted to ask Jack if he could read what Baba said to you when he first met you and Phyllis. Because he has
just to answer your question,
okay.
When I saw Baba, he was my mother and father in one. And Baba has written a very beautiful discourse on God this time as mother and father, because God as father admires the strong, upright son. And in this life, Baba again was crucified, disabled, all of that. So Baba stresses God as mother and God as father. And I saw my mother in Baba first. And then I saw my father in Baba. Baba eventually said, "Your father looks like my father." That was at a time when we visited Mrs. Deuce's home. Ivy Deuce had Baba there on an open day after his accident. And my father came. And I was very disturbed about my father because after 30 years of marriage, he left my mother. And my mother was in the last stages of cancer. And I just couldn't even look at my father. I was weeping so much. And he was giving my father 2 stories from the Bible, they tell me. Of course, in those days, nobody recorded anything. And I was weeping, so I didn't know what was happening. And then I hear Baba turn to Gustaji. Baba was seeing each individual who came to the open house at Ivy's in this room with Baba's legs, It was, as you know, the left leg, the first accident, the right leg and hip in the second. And he received everyone in his incomparable, merciful way. And I said, "Baba, how can you even look at my father?" I was telling myself. Just about then, Baba says, "Gustaji, doesn't her father look like my father?" That's how Baba handles things like that. But the interesting thing is I got a letter from Mani eventually. I still have that letter. I got a picture of you and your father. And when I first came out of the envelope, I said, "How did she ever pose with my father?" That's how my father, she said, "Your father looks like my father from here." Well, he had no mustache. She said from the lip, the forehead and all that. But anyway, so that's what Baba did to take away this kind of alienation. Baba had done that in so many instances with people, to take away judgment. That's the last thing Baba likes is judgment. I should say that's one of the major lessons Baba taught me. You can't judge. If you've taken those seminars with Don Stevens, you know what is happening all the time, this total exchange of sanskars, this removal, this unwinding, who can judge anything? Not with Baba.
What other things have you learned from Baba over the course of these last 50-some years?
That what?
When you first saw Baba, can you describe the feeling you felt?
Well, when I first saw him, I saw my mother in him. And then I saw my father in him. And Baba was very, very beautiful. He had not had the accident as yet. And this is just before the accident, of course. And then he said, I think you have it there. It was taken down verbatim by Meherji.
Okay, I'll read it. "I heard from you, from Nerina, Elizabeth, Margaret, and I heard from you within. When I see such souls who love me, I feel very happy and strong. People like Phyllis and you, Adele, are intimate ones. I love you because you love me so much. These two girls, I heard so much about you both. Phyllis and Adele, from Elizabeth, Nerina, Duncan, and Margaret. I heard from you within, that I feel so happy that at last I have seen you. Are you not nervous? I am overjoyed. Are you happy? No more happy than I am in seeing you. When you know me, you will love me like a little child. I am a child, grown up. You, Adele, are like money to me.
I said, oh, how could I be like money to Baba? I must be untouchable. Because Baba never touched money. Meherji said, you are like money to Baba. Baba said, you are like money to Baba 3 times. Then he said, Baba said you are like his sister Money. I don't see the resemblance at all.
No judgment, though.
What?
She said no judgment, and you shouldn't judge yourself,
no.
also is what she's saying.
Yeah, right.
That's true, but it's nice to know that Baba projects things for you. He also said about, we were with him in the house of the Eastern women. It's called the guest house. When Baba said, Phyllis and I were Baba's guests. Actually, at that time, nobody, 52, nobody was invited to stay, not even Ivy, or I think the Shaw stayed out of town too, actually. It was a very strange time. He just had us stay in the lantern cabin. And we were invited in when he came to the women in the evening for a talk. Of course, we were not there when Baba had his dinner with them or something. But we came in for the talk, and on one evening, there were 2 little things I could tell, because you'll probably get to that. One was, Bob, I want to hear a funny joke. I want a funny joke. And I was not prepared, but he said, it was a choice, or a religious story. I chose the religious story. Why did Peter deny Jesus? As you know, it was stated in the Bible, by the time the cock would crow 3 times, you would deny me. Jesus told him that. And Baba said, he was sitting on the couch in the guest house. He said, Peter loved me the most. But he had to do it. He had to do it. He did it consciously. And Delia, sitting there, said, and what about Judas, Baba? Well, Baba had told them a lot in India about all these characters in the Bible, but she did ask about that. She didn't know. Baba said, Judas. Then Judas served me the best. Nobody could do what Judas did. I did it. Baba said, I did it. He did nothing. I did it. Judas had to do it under a veil. He couldn't do it, so I did. I think that's the way. Is that how it's quoted? He did it under a veil. He couldn't have done it. I had to do it, but he did it, and he served me the best. And he concluded he was God realized too. That was one thing. And then Baba said, we'll have a game, a number game. You have to guess between 1 and 22. And it was my turn. And I said, 11? Yeah, that was it. Or then Phyllis, God bless Phyllis, she said after the accident, it was just perfect. 11, that was it, Adele. 11 from the day we had the game, 11 days Baba had the accident. And that was it.
And now, after the accident, you wrote back and forth with Dr. Gohair a lot and sent medical stuff and worked with Baba's x-rays.
That's true. I have just left with the archive people, Dot Lessing, 401 letters, which was the greatest grace of my life. And at the time, after we met Baba, then he said, now you can go and meet the women. And that was so beautiful. We went to the guest house, and they had laid out saris and a Punjabi outfit, which I chose. Phyllis chose the sari to put on. And then in some Baba way, I was left with Goher a little longer, even than with the beloved Mehra and Mani. And in that way, there was some karmic connection, so that eventually I was in a very strategic place to fulfill what I feel was more at the heart of my work, which was somehow I wanted always to do something for the suffering of the Christ. I was born with that kind of a complex that maybe at the time of Jesus I did the wrong thing. I once asked Mani about that. He said, no, I don't think so. I think you were there at his feet, maybe. But my own feeling always was I always wanted to relieve the suffering of the Christ. I really, really think that was the greatest privilege I had when Dr. Goer said, we need you over in America to do that. And that was my fulfillment, to be able to help her. But she needed a lot of things from America. And my brother examined Baba's x-rays. My other two brothers were able to send a lot of necessary instruments. And I did a lot of little things for Dr. Goer, because it was for Baba, naturally. I mean, her whole life was Baba's, as you know. And it was the greatest fulfillment that ever could happen. That's why I studied nursing. When I lived with Elizabeth and Norina and Nadine for about 3.5 years, every year we'd get a message from Baba, yes, I'm coming next year. Yes, I'm coming next year, coming next year. Well, then we moved out, of course, after Norina was called in 1948. She and Elizabeth were called back to India. And that's when we moved out. And after that, you figured out from 48 to 52, Baba did finally come. But we waited, in 44, when I first heard of Baba, there was this reason that we moved in with these disciples was we were helping to ready the preparation for his coming, and we would travel down with them. I took care of Nadine in Elizabeth's home at Yupon Dunes, and so that we were with them during this period before Baba was actually came. It was quite an adventure.
Adele, Baba said that you had eyes like Baba John's, and that you looked like St. Catherine of Siena.
No, not that he never said I looked like her. What he said was, one of the evenings we were talking about saints, and Baba said he named 4 saints that he apparently liked. Saint Augustine, Saint Francis.
St. Catherine of Siena.
St. Catherine of Siena.
St.
And
Teresa.
St. Teresa of Avila. And then he turned to Phyllis, he said, she reminds me of Teresa. And then he turned and he said, she reminds me of Catherine of Siena. Well, it's very interesting. I knew pretty much the other saints to some extent. I'd read the Confessions and the City of God and of St. Francis, but I'd not really known too much about Catherine of Siena. And it's interesting, she was a nurse, and she was also social service person. And ever since then, I have just, I brought some things, if any one of you want to see what she's written very beautifully on companionship and friendship. And, she's considered very high up in the church.
And Baba said you had eyes like Baba Jan. How did you feel when he said that?
Phyllis said she was green with envy. Phyllis shouldn't be green with envy because I always felt it's through Phyllis that I heard of Baba, even though we both came to him about the same time. But she was the one who, when she heard what I was studying, "You never studied Eastern thought?" She really made an issue of that.
And then you met Baba again in 1956 and 58.
Right.
Do you have any memories of those experiences?
Yes, and also I have some of Baba's letters, so many about my stay in India. That was very, very interesting. In 56 and 58, Baba was in Myrtle Beach at the Meher Center. And that was around the world, around the country tour. We met him in New York, and that was very wonderful.
Do you remember a particular experience with Baba in 56 or 1958?
There was so many things there. In 56, I also took care of Mildred Kyle. She's on Meherabad Hill, and that was a great privilege. I often felt, that I was really being trained to be a geriatric nurse because I took care of older people, and then Baba himself told me to take care of my mother. She got ill just when Baba was ill. We were standing in a circle outside of Baba's house, and this was 2 days before Baba had his accident. Baba was going to begin his trip west. And Phyllis and I were with Baba, and he turned to me and he said, "What are you thinking about?" Or something. "My brothers, will they come to you, Baba?" In time. And shortly Adele on this system, loudspeaker system, whatever, they called me. I was on the phone. Brother said, "Mother's in the hospital. We're trying to reach you. She's critical," and so forth. Tell Baba. Baba says, "Take care of your mother." And I went right away to my mother, and she was critical. They had decided not to operate. She had cancer, and it was inoperable, and so she just needed loving, tender care. That's what I did with Nadine Tolstoy. Nadine Tolstoy had Lou Gehrig disease, and for a couple of years, all she needed was loving, tender care. And my mother then, when I saw her, it was after visiting hours or something, they brushed me off. They said, "Hurry, hurry, hurry." I was so frustrated. I had a bad complex to start with because I had lived with these people, and so I left my own home. And my mother really she didn't need me, but she was attached to me, you know what I mean? So I felt, well, I have this opportunity to take care of her in her last days, and with Baba's approval. And I said, "Oh, Lord, let me take on some of her illness." I really spoke to him very much like that. That would be very nice. So that's what happened. I got real sick that night. my brother called in my brother was neurosurgeon there, and he called in his internist friend, and his internist friend said, she really has immediate surgery on her appendix. And that, just like that. So I called up, I spoke to Delia de Leon, and I said, I really don't believe in surgery. I said, don't you think maybe I should try to get it frozen? They used to do something like freezing, I don't know. I just never liked surgery. It's the only surgery I ever had. I never had a child or anything like that. And so she said, Baba said, listen to the doctor. And that night, it was a nighttime surgery. And this is a true story. I woke up in the morning in my mother's room. That was a room where they had a bed. And I took care of her right away. I never felt that surgery. I mean that. I was on my feet the next day.
When was the last time you saw Meher Baba?
1963. I have a lot of these letters where Baba arranged for me to work in the hospital.
And you saw him in Ahmednagar, in Mirzad?
I saw him at Mandalay Hall.
In Mandalay Hall. And tell me, what was it like seeing him in Mandalay Hall?
Well, that was a very, it was one of those tremendous experiences. Well, he said I should come and see him. I had made a contract with the Wadia Maternity Hospital through the help of Sarosh and for some time through Hoshang and Gohar. They had worked for it because they knew I wanted to work in India, and I had come there with a full plan to stay there forever. It wasn't working out because when I came there, they thought that all Westerners had, the training in midwifery. So what I did was, and had to enter with the agreement I would take up the midwifery.
And you last saw Baba in Mandalay Hall?
Baba said, I want you to come to Mandalay Hall, and I want Adi to pick you up. So when I came there, Adi picked me up and brought me to Mandalay Hall. And that's when I saw Baba, and that's when and Baba had me. I was there for about 6 hours. He had me go in and have lunch with Mehera, and she had leftovers from Baba. She said Baba didn't finish his lunch. You'd like to have some?
Ooh, that was special.
He gave me many instructions, but that's enough. How much time do you have?
About 1 minute.
About 1 minute.
At that time, Baba said that I had obeyed him 100% in India. He told the Mandalay. Only the Mandalay was sitting there and Dr. Goer. And I only tell you that because I came back to the States and disobeyed him 100%. I mean, it wasn't as bad as that, but the fact is, it was wonderful to obey him in India. And the reason is that I wanted to have that experience of just staying there forever. Because if you worked in a hospital there, you wouldn't have a minute to yourself. You'd just be so preoccupied. And that's the secret to everything. Baba says, forget yourself, do your work, and that's when you don't worry, and you'll be happy and make everybody else happy. I came back to this country. I got myself into a Western mentality more so, and then things went askew, much more so. But in India, I was a premature baby nurse, and I was a good one. I don't mind telling you. And when I went to India, and they didn't have any of those Armstrongs or isolates, where you had and they had a hospital full of premature babies. So they die. They just die. So I have some letters in which Baba says, just don't worry about it. you have to just do your best, and I'll take care of that.
Thank you so much, Adele.
Thank you, Adele. Thank you.